Hey YouTube, happy Labor Day. Today in this video I'm going to be answering this StackOverflow question. How to show labels in Seaborn plots. This was asked back in December of 2018 by user Astro123. The question says, I was trying to plot using Seaborn, but the label was not showing up even though it was assigned in the axes object. How to show label on the plot. Here's code here. And he's saying that the legend gives an error, no handles with labels found to put in legend. So I'm going to grab all this like I usually do, and go back over to my notebook, make a markdown cell, format the code, and also format this error as code, like such. And I'm also just going to grab this and kind of walk through it. So he mentions that he wants to use Seaborn, but he hasn't imported it anywhere, so I'm going to add that real quick. Otherwise we'll get an error. And let's just run it. So we get this plot right here. This little square here is actually the legend. But there's an error saying no handles with labels found to put in legend, which is exactly what Astro123 said. So, we've got a data set, dx, with two columns, C0 and C1, with some values, and an index of A, B, C, D, E. He has a plot here, AX, he's trying to make. He's using index on the x-axis, C0 on the y-axis, data, he wants it red, scaled, dodged, capsized, and to be labeled as child. And then he puts another plot also on AX called teen with a different color using the C1 column. Create the legend, show it. His hope, which is similar to how you potentially do this in matplotlib, would be to use the labels. But pointplot and Seaborn doesn't do it like that. Instead, Seaborn uses what's called tidy or long form data rather than wide. Wide meaning instead of having all the variables in one column and then their values in another column, they have, for example, in this instance, C0 has its own column, C1 has its own column, etc. And you can trace that back to here. And this comes from Hadley Wickham, who's a developer in R, and his academic paper, and he specifies that each variable should be or is a column, and each observation is a row. Oops. So, to get that to work, let's take a look at what dx looks like right now, and we've got this. And what we would want is for each of C0 and C1 to be in one column called variable, and all the values under them would be in another column called values. Easy enough. Now when I originally had done this, you had to reset the index like this, and then you would melt the data set, specifying that you want the ID vars, or ID variables, to be the index, like this. And this would allow us to use the index column as our x-axis, the variable is our hue, and the values of those hues to be on the y-axis. But since Panda's version 1.1.0, I believe, we don't have to reset the index anymore. There's actually a parameter in melt called ignore index, and by default this set is true. So if I were to just run this as itself, we actually lose the index. But if we set it to false, meaning don't ignore the index, we keep it like so, and it actually saves us from having to reset the index and then specify the index as our ID vars. It keeps it over here and does the same thing. It continues to set the variables based on the columns and creates a value column as well, which is exactly what we want. So I'll do it this way. Now the next thing we'd want to do is we'd want to plot. So if I come up here and just grab all this plotting material, place it in here. Since we're using Seaborn and we've got long form data, we only need to plot once. And what we're going to plot is dx.index and then the values, or value column. And rather than coloring them manually, we'll let Seaborn pick some hues based on the variable. And while we're at it, I'm also going to remove this label here because it doesn't work like that. And then we're going to add a legend and plot. And it gives us this beautiful graph, right? We've got a legend, we've got two lines, one for the C0 and the C1. The problem is Astro123 wants the C0s to be called child and the C1s to be called teen. Now the easiest way to do this would be to take dx, and instead of having the variables called C0 and C1, just call C0 child and C1 teen. So we could replace them like this. And we get this. But let's assume that Astro123 doesn't want to edit the original data set for whatever reason. So instead of doing that, we can grab all this stuff again and just edit the legend labels. Remove this piece here. And I'm going to add a line of code called ax.getLegendHandlesLabels. And this returns two values, h and l. H are your handle are the legend handles, and L are the legend labels. So the handles are kind of like the colorful part of the legend, and the labels are the labels corresponding to those colorful markers or lines or patches. So we don't need to edit H. We can keep that in here. We do need to edit L. And L, by default, is a list of length 2, because there's only two labels. And what we need to remember is that the first one being plotted is C0. And that's because it's the first one that shows up in the list. It has nothing to do with alphabetical order or anything like that. It's whatever data value is presented first. So C0 is first, and C0 corresponds to child. So we say child. And then C1 follows after that as teen, so we add teen. Put L in there, plot, and we get child and teen. And that's the answer. If you liked it, please comment, subscribe, like, ring the bell, and as always, if you've got enough reputation, come on over to Stack Overflow and give me an upvote. You can find my answer down quite a ways here. Thank you.